All right, so hope everybody's back at it, and I get to introduce now. I'm very happy to do so. Matt Sweeney, who is one of the top architects here for our kind of front end approach, how we go about CSS and JavaScript and markup. And I've stolen this line quite a few times in talks I've given. It's my favorite definition of Web 2.0, and that's getting it right the second time. We've spent a lot of time over the last years kind of recovering from a lot of the shortcomings we took, in the last 10 years. And so Matt's going to kind of articulate our vision for what we think is important from a front-end architecture kind of perspective and ways to establish a better foundation for this next generation of the web. So with that, I turn it over to Matt Sweeney.
Thanks. Hello. First off, thanks for coming. Also, thanks to Bradley, Chad, Eric, Thomas, and all the other Yahoo folks who helped make this event possible today. So getting right in, pardon this sensational title here, but I just wanted to take the opportunity to draw some attention to the chance that we have now to help better enable the original vision of the web. What do I mean by that? Well, the web was conceived as a way to solve the problem of information access over networks with various machines attached. Here's a line from Tim Berners-Lee's original www proposal. Emphasis was definitely on portability, more so than bells and whistles. So how does that fit into this Web 2.0 world? Well, I want to take a minute here to sort of work towards an outline as to how we might be able to still achieve this vision while at the same time having rich internet applications. So let's just take a minute here to kind of pull back and take a bird's eye view over the history of HTML. So HTML is the foundation that we build on. So even though I know JavaScript is the hot topic these days, keep in mind that this is the foundation that we're building on top of. And it was originally introduced to help solve this problem of how do we share and transport content over the network to various machines. So 92, Tim Berners-Lee proposed this to solve that problem. And right around the same time, there was a proposal for something called HTML+, which was HTML1 with a little bit more, and that was the first clue towards the potential of using style sheets to present this information in meaningful ways. So what did HTML1 look like? It was a really simple subset of what we have now. It was strictly content-based, so you could say what a link was, what a paragraph was, what your headers were, lists, some inline text stuff, plain text, example, as well as some meta tags for like title, address, is index. Then came HTML2, which again was still working towards solving this same problem. People were now asking for a little bit more control over the look and feel of this content. So we see a bunch more semantic elements show up, as well as a couple presentational. We've got the B, we've got the TT, the I, HR, BR, debatable, I suppose. Okay, all right, then 3.2 in 97. So even though you see here that the emphasis is on generic semantics, HTML 3.2 did really open the floodgates for presentational markup and really now being able to build a high-fidelity web-based document that would work for the devices and agents of the time. Okay, so what does that look like? So all the green tags are what's been added. In HTML 3.2, you can see that we've now got strike, S, center, font, big, small, a few more semantic elements for tables. Now we've got the TH, TD, TR. And then in addition to bringing in some presentational markup here, they also introduced presentational attributes for things like color, background color, really to give more control over how this content was presented at the markup level. So this was a pragmatic solution to the problem of how do we make these things look better. And even though there was still a nod to style sheets, and style sheets had been proposed as a CSS spec at this point, they were far from being supported the way we would want them to be in order to get the same effects we could get from the markup here, right? And then HTML 4.01 comes out in 98, and now this really wants to take a step back in one hand, and they start deprecating the presentational attributes, but at the same time, again, making a nod that the goal here is to make this stuff accessible to everybody. The chosen medium here is HTML. Anybody that's coming to the HTML with an HTML reader should be able to consume that HTML. So hopefully we've marked that up in a meaningful way for them to consume. So here's HTML4. The red tags now indicate some of the deprecated tags, and then you can also see what else has been added. So we've added a few more semantic elements that are helpful for meaningfully describing their content, and deprecated some of the more purely visual elements. For example, we've traded strike, which is a very specific presentation for deleted text, and for the del tag, which is a much more generic representation. Doesn't necessarily mean that it should have a strike through. That's just one way that we could represent deleted text. Okay, so where does that leave us today? Well, today some of us are still cleaning up this legacy code from the past where we really had to intertwine all of the presentation and in many cases the behavior directly into the markup, which makes for fairly monolithic blocks of markup that have a lot of things happening there, and and chances are the inline presentation is scattered throughout, and trying to maintain and make changes to that is relatively difficult. When we're encountering that, we're hopefully cleaning that up as we go along, simplifying the markup, moving presentation to the CSS layer, and I know most of us are probably starting to make heavy use of JavaScript. So what does that look like there? So a lot of you probably recognize this if you've been writing markup for a few years. Unfortunately, I think there's still some 10-year-old code floating around on Yahoo that probably looks a little like this. But you can see here there's a lot going on. I'd be a little hesitant to touch anything in here without knowing I'm going to break something. I've got my TDs. Hopefully all of the call spans match up and everything looks good, but I wouldn't really dare move a TD without recalculating anything that needed to be recalculated. Some other highlights. We've got inline colors. We're using a separate TD to produce this little square bullet for this list item. Inline font tags. What else? Oh, inline JavaScript behavior, which might be okay, but now that this link depends on JavaScript, we've gone from being 100% accessible to less than 100% accessible. Plus the fact that like the presentation, the behavior is baked directly into the markup, so whenever we would want to change the presentation or the behavior, we would have to go dig through all of our markup stored in however many component or templates and update all that. So yeah, sounds like fun. So this is something that I'm seeing a little of now. This is kind of an extreme case, but it sort of highlights the fact that even though we've moved away from using tables for the layout and we're using CSS for the presentation, we've still got presentation that's embedded in our markup. And in the case of the last link there, we've got what I assume is behavior baked into the markup, class equals pop-up. Beyond that, my hrefs are stubbed out, so I'm assuming that the magic of JavaScript is going to swoop down and handle those clicks and do something else. But again, that's relying on the magic of JavaScript. Now we're taking away some of the functionality of this core markup. Yeah, so moving right along. Now this is something that's starting to look a lot better. This is really simple. You can understand what the code is, and these are all just elements that were introduced originally in HTML1, except for the div. And the nice thing about the div, it's closed down there, I swear, is that it gives us a way to divide this section of content from other sections of content. And we can give it an ID now, which allows us to directly target any styles or behavior that we may want to hook into this news module without ever having to go back and touch the markup. So now that everything's separate, we can just go ahead and write our markup, put that in a template, hopefully never have to really worry about changing that too much in the future, because chances are this is going to be a list. They're going to be links, and if we ever do need to change any colors or positioning, or we don't want the last one to pop up anymore, we can do that all remotely through the other appropriate layers. Okay, so Web 2.0. So these are kind of the things that I hear about Web 2.0, or more open and content sharing, APIs to help enable people to share content, people really starting to now mix and match code bases to build really powerful, rich applications. And so now that we have the opportunity also to leverage the original vision of the web and use the markup as the content layer, use CSS as the presentation layer, use JavaScript as the behavioral layer, that better enables all of these things now, because I'll be able to share my content without having to pre-bake the presentation. Somebody else may want to style it differently. They're free to do so. They may want it to behave differently. They're free to do so. I've completely separated and isolated my content from the other layers of the functionality. So these are some things that I'd also like to see become mantras of Web 2.0. Semantic markup, I'm sure a lot of you have heard this term. Progressive enhancement. So this is sort of the opposite of graceful degradation, right? So graceful degradation says, oh, now I'm about to release this thing. What happens when they don't have JavaScript? What kind of a fallback do we put in place? What happens if they don't have CSS? What do we do? And that's kind of a top-down model, whereas progressive enhancement really says start from the bottom, the foundation, HTML, make it clean and presentation and behavior free, and build up from there with those other layers, which allows us to really separate these concerns and better keep it componentized so that the scripting guy can touch the JavaScript and the CSS guy can work on the presentation, and nobody really has to go back and hack the markup. And then encapsulation. As we're trying to share code more and more, we need to make sure that we're not stepping on other people's styles. We're not stepping on other people's JavaScript variables. And we need to make sure that they're not stepping on ours as well. All right, so let's talk a little bit about semantics here. What do we mean by semantics? Well, we're really talking about choosing the appropriate markup for the job, rather than using a presentational element or using an element that you like the look and feel of for your particular design. Consider using more appropriate markup for that, and then worrying about how you're going to get that look and feel out of that once you get to the presentation layer. And avoid baking your presentation directly into markup, even if it's just class names or IDs that hint at the presentation. Try and avoid that and think of names that are more meaningful. Try not to have any core functionality that depends on JavaScript. Hopefully your forms can submit, your links work, and then you can build up from there. And now you know that everything's in place for a functional application, but now I have the opportunity to enable it to look better, to behave more dynamically for those that can consume those layers. But at the very basic level, this is 100% accessible to anyone who comes in with a HTML-enabled device. So another way to think of this would be as the wireframe for your application. You should be able to look at a design, look at the requirements, even if the visual side of it isn't fully fleshed out yet, and understand what's going on here. What's the task at hand? What are the elements that I might need to complete that task in a simple way. How is the content coming in? Where is it coming from? What is the goal of this content? Choose elements that'll help you achieve that. And when you're choosing names, keep in mind that the names, the same way you should choose semantic elements, we should choose semantic names that mean something to the content rather than mean something to the presentation or mean something to the behavior. We should be able to take away the behavior and the presentation and still get some meaning out of those. For example, left column, top nav, red box, these are all names that imply some type of presentation, either color, in the case of red box, or location. All of these things I could theoretically change from CSS, but now that but following this convention, I would have to go back, find all those attributes, update those, hope that nobody else's JavaScript or CSS is depending on those names and me breaking those by changing them out from under them. Whereas choosing more appropriate or even generic names in some case that can live forever enables us to let the markup live beyond the life cycle of any particular design. And also keep in mind that this ID attribute really means something at all three of these different levels. In HTML, this is your anchor link to jump directly to the news module. IDs are unique, so we know that there's only going to be one news module. Same with CSS. This gives us a powerful way to directly target our styles now to the news module. We know, okay, only the news module will get a border. And again, in JavaScript, this is our handle for adding behaviors, event handlers, what have you, any kind of manipulation we would like to do directly on that element. So don't choose a name that is bound to any single layer. Try to bind the name directly to the meaning of the content. Classes. Well, from my perspective, classes are overly abused in most cases, and there's usually a corresponding semantic element that you could use, and then with the combination of descendant selectors with CSS targeting the ID, and then we can put our styles directly on these elements within this ID rather than having to make up arbitrary class names to hang our styles on. There are some good uses for classes, though. For example, extending semantics. We don't have a date tag, but maybe you want to extend the semantics of your markup so that you can have a bunch of dates in your page and control the look and feel of all your dates. You may have agreed upon semantics for your organization that you can leverage and reuse. There might be some micro formats that you can apply. So when choosing class names, really try to leverage any existing semantics that are already out there rather than reinventing things. Because keep in mind, the whole goal here is for everyone to be working from an agreed upon namespace, simplified markup, CSS properties, etc. And then the last one would be, so then supplementing selector support. Well, let's say like for IE6, there's no easy way to target the first child because they don't have first child pseudo-class support. Well, when you're adding a hook to get to that first child, consider adding that hook in a forward-thinking manner that will hint at where you're going with it. So if you really do need to hook into the first or last element, just call those first and last child. And then when the time comes, IE7 swoops in, clears out IE6, and we can go back and start undoing that stuff. And it's done in a meaningful enough way where it's obvious that if we take this away, we should be okay as long as we track down the corresponding style rule. And again, choose meaningful names here, not presentationally based like colors or position or behaviorally based. Keep these really simple and meaningful to the content itself and worry about how you're going to style it or make it behave from the appropriate layer there. Okay, so what are some examples of this? Well, you might see somebody do div class equals title or span class equals error. What does that mean? Well, if we take away CSS, that's really just text. Div doesn't come with any inherent meaning. Span doesn't come with any inherent meaning. So we really lose the meaning here without the style, that corresponding style to go along with this. Which means either someone without CSS or screen readers or web crawlers aren't going to get the same meaning out of this that a CSS-enabled reader would. Whereas if we're using headers in H2, for example, or some type of emphasis tag, strong in this case, now we can give this meaning. The strong class equals error now implies that this line of text is emphasized more so than the surrounding text. Again, it doesn't tell you that it's an error necessarily, but it does draw attention to itself in a similar way that maybe your red color would. And then we're leveraging existing semantics that are baked into the markup. Headers are for titles, headings. Emphasis is for exactly that, without having to reinvent class names to do the same job. So why bother with all this? Well, again, keep in mind that markup's the foundation that we're building on. This is going to be the bottom layer that we're going to want to put on our presentation on top of, put our behavior on top of, and we're going to want that to be as stable and live as long as possible. Why? Other reasons are search engine optimization. By minimizing the markup down to just the appropriate content elements, we're really now able to convey the meaning of this page in a much better way. Same goes for accessibility. If we're making good use of headers, a screen reader can navigate quickly through the page and organize it in a meaningful way without having to get tripped up by lots of presentational elements that it may or may not try to do something with. This also allows us to better target our styles and scripts later on. We're really now narrowing the scope of our markup to unique components that have their own IDs that might live in other groups of things, but this gives us a lot of leverage in terms of how we're going to hook in and apply our presentation or apply our behavior. And keep in mind that the names you choose shouldn't have to change when the design changes, and other folks are probably relying on those names, so we don't necessarily just want to change them arbitrarily out from underneath them. We want the names in the markup to live beyond the current design, beyond the current interaction. So that said, one rule to think about is that your markup should really stand alone. It should be meaningful without a visual component. It should be meaningful without JavaScript. So choose names that will last. And a good test for this is when you've chosen a name and you're looking at your source, does it make sense when you take away the style? Does it make sense when you take away the behavior? If not, then you might consider a more semantic name that you'll be able to hook that style and that behavior into, but that can be meaningful beyond the life cycle of those styles and behaviors. Okay, so the next topic in here that this is sort of alluding to is progressive enhancement. Again, we're talking about building from the bottom up here. In this example, we've got a form. It's got a label and an input and a button, and it's got an action. So it's pretty clear what's going to happen here. Hopefully there's a form handler set up on Video Search PHP to return me some videos. But if that's the case, then I can just use this form. I can do a search, get my results, move on. I don't really care necessarily that this form has a box around it or that it's got a certain background color. At this point, those are concerns that are above this layer. And let's look at those layers. Now I want to go back and I want to add some style to the form, give it a color, fix the width. It turns out my visual design doesn't include a label, but probably for accessibility purposes, we'd want to leave the label in there anyway. So go ahead and hide that. Style the inputs. And now, let's see. So then, let's say, we want an AJAX request here. So instead of submitting the form, I'm going to intercept that submission with JavaScript, pull in the results dynamically, fill in the page. Rather than having to have that baked directly into my markup, I can simply hook into that submit event, listen for it, then call my corresponding send form function, pass it the form that I'm submitting, and cancel the default behavior of the form submission. So now that gives me a nice, robust widget that just works regardless of the other above layers. It doesn't have any dependencies between the layers. So what does this mean? What does it take to do this? Well, in some cases, you're going to want to withhold your CSS and JavaScript from certain user agents. We've got what we call the C-grade list. These are basically known vendors. All of our major browser vendors today older versions of their products. So we know, for example, we don't want IE3 to get anything, so they should be on the blacklist. IE4, 5, 5.5, probably not 6 just yet, but you get the idea. So we need to put some thought into how to manage that and how to really enable this experience for everybody and be smart about who gets what. We need to put a little more thought in up front about the markup we choose, the names we choose, considering what's going to be happening at the other layers and what's going to be happening in the future in terms of maintenance, redesigns, etc. Again, try not to depend on JavaScript for our core tasks, which means in some cases we'll have to set up an alternate flow, although in a lot of cases you're going to have that logic on the server anyway. It's just a matter of how are you going to surface that data in a meaningful way. And then, of course, if we're saying it works without JavaScript, we should probably verify that by testing without JavaScript. So it seems like a little more work up front, but the benefits of this are that it just works for everybody. Anyone with an HTML reader that comes asking for your content should be able to consume your content. It enables better reuse and sharing of their code by isolating the appropriate layers accordingly, and then those could be hot swapped as they need. If you want a style sheet switcher to reskin your module, that's great. If you want a behavior switcher, no problem. This also gives you a functional prototype that just works early in the development. So let's say you just want to prototype this interaction out without necessarily jumping right into the JavaScript. You can do that. It just works at any point along the development cycle. As that release date starts to trickle in, you might actually get to a point where you can decide, well, maybe we don't need that thing to be Ajax. So you've got the other things ready to go. It's going to work for everybody. So you don't necessarily have to worry about slipping a deadline to really scramble and add that dynamic behavior at the last minute. Another side effect of this is that you could deliver the HTML wireframe before the design is final and be working on filling that in and hooking it up to the back end and just making that work without really caring too much about what the design is going to look like. This enables the engineers to be running and building this stuff out without worrying about how it looks. And then when the design does come in, they can start layering that in from CSS without having to touch the markup and the work that's already been done in the templates. This will also help simplify debugging by letting you know, well, if I'm having a presentational issue, chances are it's in my CSS somewhere. If there's a behavioral issue, it's in my script somewhere. It more clearly defines the roles and where this stuff might live when the time comes to fix it or maintain it in the future. And the same goes for maintenance. When you're trying to say, oh, well, I need to change the color of that thing, it's much simpler if you just have to go into CSS, change the one style declaration, rather than try to hunt down however many classes or other inline presentational markup that you might have to. Okay, and then the last piece of this that I mentioned was encapsulation. So what does that mean? That means that we want our code to play nicely together. We don't want to step on each other's toes. So how do we do that? Well, in CSS, we do that by being as specific as possible with our selectors. If you've got an ID, hopefully it's unique enough that it's not going to clobber somebody else's ID if they're trying to intermingle. And then beyond that, you can use that ID as the namespace to target the rest of your styles. This is where descendant selectors might come in handy. In JavaScript, use namespaces. Encapsulate your JavaScript with anonymous functions. There's a lot of different ways to do this, but avoid global variables. And don't invent your own markup. We're talking about an agreed upon set of tags here that everybody should just know and be able to consume. As soon as we start inventing our own markup, we start violating that. And now I don't know what this thing is supposed to be. This reader doesn't know what it's supposed to be. Even worse, somebody else may have invented that markup, but they want it to be different than this. So same goes for attributes. If you get to a point where you really want or need to invent your own markup, consider doing that with namespaces in XHTML, for example. Now you have a way to properly encapsulate your tags, your attributes in a meaningful way, and it'll better guarantee that they're not going to collide with anybody else's arbitrary markup or attributes. So in CSS, what does it look like? Well, here we've got a unique ID, news, and now we're targeting all of the styles directly to the news and the children of news. So we can say the header in news is a certain color, the emphasis of the header is a different color, and then the selected item gets a background color. JavaScript, again, some examples of namespaces: Yahoo util, Dojo bind. Remember to avoid using global variables and try to scope those locally to your functions, or at the very least wrap everything in an anonymous function. Because keep in mind, we're really trying to protect our code from other people's code, and at the same time be a good API citizen and protect others from our code. So in the future, what are we going to be looking at here? So even though all of this is already happening today, it's just going to get bigger in the future. We're going to have more HTML readers. We're going to have more media types. We're going to have more code intermingling. These goals really will help and enable all this in the future. And it'll also help ensure the longevity of the work that we do today. So again, what do we have to do to support this vision? Well, first thing we have to assume is that the only thing we know for sure is the people that are coming to us have some type of HTML reader. So at the very least, they should be able to consume our HTML. They should be able to use our form, follow our link, read our story. And also, they should be able to understand the content without CSS. They should still know that these are navigational links, even if they can't see the scallop tabs around those. Also, don't depend on JavaScript for core functionality. That's at the top layer. If I can't click on this link down here, it's going to be more challenging to come back and make that work in the case where we decide, we don't want that to be dynamic after all. And of course, keep in mind that when you do cross these lines, do so reluctantly, but also thoughtfully. When you're going back, for example, to add an extra hook to your markup so that you can deliver some style, think about what is the context of that style. Am I trying to make this piece of text bigger or smaller? If that's the case, maybe you're emphasizing it and you don't really realize that. So maybe there's an appropriate HTML tag that you can use to help enable the delivery of that style without necessarily just having to go back and add arbitrary spans or other hooks. And the same goes for JavaScript. And if you do have to cross these lines with JavaScript, consider not delivering the control for that functionality, because there's going to be some percentage of the people that will have a useless control if it's in the markup, but they don't have the JavaScript to support that. So use JavaScript to deliver the control that depends on JavaScript as well. I guess that's about it. I know that this is probably pretty lofty ideal here, and in practice everybody's got time and resource crunches going on, but you should really consider the time it's going to take for you or the next guy that comes along to maintain the code we're writing now. Also consider the amount of time you're going to be spent debugging what may have broken at the various layers. You might end up spending a ton of time later on down the line figuring out why your JavaScript submission didn't work, when if you had a simple client-server setup, then you would minimize the chance for failure in that layer. But most importantly, consider the people that are coming and asking for this content and may or may not be able to actually get that content. We don't want to inadvertently or especially on purpose lock them out without really giving some thought to why we're doing that. So yeah, thanks. Appreciate you guys coming out. I'll hang out if you want to shoot some questions or